Oh, wait, you got more coming. Here, let me slide down here with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jean Shaheen. I am a senator from the state of New Hampshire and am co-leading this delegation to the Halifax International Security Forum with Senator Jim Risch from Idaho. If you were there last night at the dinner, you heard me say that we get to do this because we have the shortest shared border with Canada in our states. That's a joke. Yeah. Please don't print that as...
It is to me.
Yeah. But we're delighted to be here, and I want to thank all of the organizers of the Peter Van Praagh and the organizers of the Halifax International Security Forum for hosting us, and also point out that when we were here last year, we were still experiencing the fallout from COVID. I think people were masked at that time. It's very nice as someone who comes from a state that borders Canada to have the border fully open, to have people and goods going back across that border in a way that is very important to the economies of both of our countries. This is the biggest bipartisan, bicameral delegation to the Halifax Security Forum that I have participated in my years here. We have 6 senators. Let me introduce them. They are, I said Senator Risch. We also have Senator Gillibrand from New York, Senator Coons from Delaware, Senator Rounds from North Dakota, and Senator, South Dakota.
Pheasants, think pheasants.
Pheasants, that's right. I do know they're different. And Senator Rosen from Nevada. We also have from the House, Congressman McCall from Texas, Congressman Crow from Colorado, and Congresswoman Jacobs from California. So as you can see, this is a very bipartisan delegation that represents the full span of the United States. And I think it's important for us to be here and to be here with representation from the administration, because this is an opportunity for us to engage with the international community. And this year, given the war in Ukraine, that is even more important, particularly as we think about the challenge of continuing to support Ukraine. I was very pleased that President Zelensky spoke virtually to the forum, and his message was one that was shared by the Canadian Minister of Defense, Ms. Adnan, as well as Secretary of Defense for the United States, Austin. And that was the critical importance of standing up for democracy, of working with our allies to ensure that the support is there to win this war in Ukraine and to hold Vladimir Putin accountable for his unprovoked, brutal aggression. So we will try and be short so we have a chance to answer some of your questions. And now I'd like to turn over the podium to Senator Risch.
Well, thank you very much, Jean. Look, a lot has happened in the last year. As we came here last year and talked to you, there were 3 issues. They were China, China, and China. And of course, that has changed dramatically. Our view has been diverted to Europe. And with the ongoing war in Europe, the world faces a real challenge. I'm assuming all of you heard the Secretary of Defense this morning, Lloyd Austin, speak about this matter. It wasn't as much a speech, really, as it was an essay. And it was really, really well done. He not only talked about what the policy of the United States was, but more importantly, he talked about why that policy was or is what it is. And it was a fairly lengthy speech, but it held people's attention for that whole period of time. But to boil it down very simply, what's going on in Ukraine is really going to dictate how the world operates in the rest of this century. The United Nations was put together for very specific purposes. One of those was to contain countries in the borders that they had and state very clearly that simply at the whim of another country, they couldn't take a piece or all of a country adjacent or otherwise. That is the purpose of this. How this ends is going to dictate how autocrats look at what their ability to do is as we go forward in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
I think this conference has been essential. I've had two major takeaways. One, I think what Secretary Austin laid out as the reason why America should care what's happening in Ukraine, that we care deeply about our shared values of democracy and freedom. We care deeply about the strength of NATO as an alliance. We care deeply about the EU and the stability of Europe. These are important shared values that we have to continue to hold dear and we have to protect. The second takeaway, we heard from a lot of speakers who are leading revolutions in their country, whether it's the opposition leader from Belarus or opposition in Iran. We are seeing the rise of leaders and voices that we have not seen before. And this is the struggle that I think is a shared one, that democracy must prevail and that we have to help and support those who are fighting for it.
Thanks. I'm Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. When I first came to the Halifax conference, it was as part of a delegation led by Senator John McCain, and I was glad to see that we both, as you've heard an address from President Zelensky of Ukraine, but also that the John McCain Public Service Leadership Award was given to the women of Ukraine and presented by Jack McCain. This is a great opportunity for us as a bipartisan and bicameral delegation to participate in panels, to meet with leaders of our partners and allies and to talk about our shared priorities, and for us with one voice to express our support for robust and sustained contributions to the Ukrainian war effort. President Biden has just sent to Congress a significant supplemental funding request. I think if you ask us, every single member of this delegation intends to support it. That's certainly been our public statements. My view, we should increase it. We should add to the humanitarian investment. As of today, there are roughly 10 million Ukrainians struggling with the loss of power, water, heat as winter is beginning. I think the best thing we can do to contribute to victory in Ukraine is to make it clear that we intend to continue to support Ukraine's fight against Russia's brutal invasion. Thank you. Next up, Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota.
Thanks, Chris, and good afternoon. I think we're all here for one reason in particular, and that is to show our bipartisan support for the continued support for our Ukrainian friends. A victory for Ukraine is truly a victory for the entire free world. Thank you. And now, out of Nevada and Las Vegas, Senator Jackie Rosen.
Thank you. Well, first off, I want to thank Senators Shaheen and Risch for leading us here today, for coming here every time and having this conversation. Is extremely important. And as everyone has stated, my colleagues and I are committed to standing with the Ukrainian people, and we are resolute in making sure that we provide Ukraine with the resources it needs to defend itself. We also want to commit ourselves to the transatlantic unity that we must have against Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. But we're also here to talk about other things. So I'm going to bring up one additional thing that we haven't talked about yet, maintaining our technological superiority, specifically through cybersecurity. So we're also here today to talk about ensuring that the United States and our allied partners are resilient on threats, technological threats and cybersecurity threats. These attacks, they pose imminent threats to every business, government, our critical infrastructure, our energy grid, our water systems. We must take this seriously. Digital space knows no physical borders sometimes. And we've seen Russia and other bad actors launch these cyber attacks. So in addition to standing with Ukraine, we need to think about our digital world and how we can continue to keep that safe. Thank you. And next, we have from the great state of Texas, Congressman Michael McCall.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Senators Shaheen and Risch, for inviting me. It's an honor to be part of the delegation. I'm Michael McCall. I'm the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. This has been a great opportunity to meet with our NATO allies and our allies in general. A good meeting with Sweden as we look at Sweden and Finland joining NATO hopefully soon. But really focused on the task at hand, and that is Ukraine and how vitally important that is. And we have to educate people back home as to why it's so important. We know when I was in Poland, they said, this is the largest invasion we've seen since World War II. And it reminded them very much of 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. And think if we had stopped that earlier, how many lives we could have saved in World War II. But at the same time, you're seeing a very aggressive China that's looking at, Chairman Xi is looking at Taiwan, for instance. And our ambassador to China told me that the best deterrence would be a victory for Ukraine. We were told that this whole conflict, we knew it was going to happen, by the way, that Putin was going to invade, and we were told it'd be over in 4 days. And here we are 9 months later, and the Ukrainians are winning this fight in a very inspiring way. And it's our duty, and I think our NATO partners' responsibility to help them win that fight, because as Senator Risch said, there's just too much at stake. It will impact the rest of this century. And so I'm proud to be a part of this, and thanks for having me. And now I want to introduce Congressman Crow from Colorado.
Good afternoon. I'm Jason Crow from the state of Colorado. I come to this conference with 3 frames. One frame as a U.S. combat veteran. I have served and fought with many of the allies and partners that we are meeting with and having these discussions with over the next couple of days. The second is as a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. And I work with a lot of the foreign partners who are also here having discussions. But the third is as a member from a state that's one of the most national security defense-oriented states in the country. So bringing these 3 frames to bear, what I've noticed is something very unique and special that's happening here this weekend. When you go into the halls in these sessions, there is robust and honest and candid discussion. And what that tells me is that we are more than just allies on paper, more than just partners, and more than just friends, that we are family. As a community of nations dedicated to sovereignty, to independence, to freedom, it requires a certain level of confidence to have family-oriented discussions about the future of free and open democratic states and how we address our collective challenges. That is a value proposition that Russia and our adversaries cannot and will not ever be able to provide. We come to this with mutual respect to have these discussions of how we can collectively address these problems. So with that, I am proud to introduce my great friend from the state of California, Sarah Jacobs.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you to Senators Shaheen and Risch for leading this delegation and including me. It's my first time at the Halifax Security Forum, and it's been a wonderful experience so far. And I echo everything my colleagues said. I think it's very clear from the conversations we've had in our bilateral meetings, from the conversations we've had in the hallways, from the plenary sessions, that there is a real common, united desire to see Ukraine succeed, and that we're all thinking about what the future of the rules-based international order is and how we continue to maintain that, upholding our values and the values that we want people around the world to be able to live with. So thank you so much.
I think we're happy to answer questions, and our colleague will call on folks.
So please state your name and outlet. It'll be 1 question per journalist, and we'll start on the right side of the room.
Steve Chase with the Globe and Mail newspaper in Canada. I wanted to welcome you all here to Canada, and it's a conversation we're having with our NATO allies here, and I wanted to ask you a continuity of leadership question about NATO. The Secretary General's term ends next year, and there's been a Canadian name floating around in circles as a possible replacement, Chrystia Freeland. She's the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and a Ukrainian Canadian. It was the New York Times, of all places, that mentioned this. This was a name floating around Washington. So I wanted to invite Senator Risch, Coons, Shaheen, anyone. Would you be willing to support a Canadian candidate for the next Secretary General of NATO, and Ms. Freeland in particular?
Well, let me just say, I'm not going to weigh in to that. effort, but I do want to point out the excellent job that the current Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, has done during his tenure. And I think that we need to look for someone who can provide that kind of leadership for NATO during what will continue to be challenging times. I also think that it's important that we look at the commitment that those countries who participate in NATO make both to the compact and to the resource requirement. And so I hope that that will be something that everyone will recommit to ensure that they're providing the 2% of GDP that NATO has asked of its members.
Yeah, Gene couldn't have said it better. Look, this isn't our business to wade into this. Certainly, our Canadians are like cousins to us, siblings. We're not going to have any problem with that at all. But the good news is whoever takes it over is taking over a organization that is stronger than it's ever been.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. Joe Gould from Defense News. Senator Coons, you noted that you support increasing Ukraine aid. The Biden administration has several times proposed packages, and Congress has increased those packages. What's expected to happen? Is Congress expected to add to the president's Ukraine proposal? And also, should we expect any kind of aid package for Taiwan, a similar security aid package for Taiwan?
The supplemental touches on a number of areas, but the Ukraine portion of it is the largest. It is my hope that we will add to it. It's specifically my hope that we'll add to the humanitarian side of it. The military side is robust. The economic support side is robust. But I also am clear that Ukraine's needs are significant. And because of Russia's continued and tragically, in some ways, effective bombardment of their electrical infrastructure, I think they will grow. I think there is a real risk of another wave of refugees and of intensifying humanitarian need. I also think, frankly, while Ukraine is making steady progress on the battlefront, we ought to continue to provide them with robust support. We are grateful for the sustained investment by our allies and partners, Canada, NATO, EU, and other nations. But frankly, the United States needs to make it clear we are willing to not just provide the package the president has requested, but add to it in ways that we think will add to Ukraine's defense.
You want to? Sure.
Yeah, on the Taiwan question, my Taiwan Policy Act passed out of committee. It's currently in the National Defense Authorization, and it's a $2 billion foreign military financing to Taiwan. It's very important we get weapons in there for deterrence. And we had a very good discussion with Secretary Austin about our defense industrial base and how we need to really fix it and make it more robust.
Stu Magnuson, National Defense Magazine. This is a question both from somebody who writes about disinformation from foreign governments and also someone who cares very deeply about his profession, journalism. So it's for Senator Coons. You mentioned in the last panel about helping, maybe Congress could help U.S. journalism bolster it somehow. I'm interested in hearing some details. That's kind of a first. I've never heard anyone from Congress, and a lot of people in journalism would, want to cherish their independence. So I'm curious about how you could fill the holes of that. So many small newspapers have gone out of business, especially small towns in all your states. So just some details on what you're thinking.
Three things. First, thank you. We are investing time in this press conference because we believe in investing time in the free media and having you ask us hard questions, being accountable. That's one of the most foundational elements of a successful open society. Second, we do fund both within the State Department's efforts at providing content and supporting global media. I think there's more we can and should do. Senator Klobuchar has a piece of legislation that might strengthen revenue sharing with social media platforms for independent journalistic outlets in the United States that I think is intriguing and worth our consideration. I also think we can and should provide support for communities of independent content providers and journalists We provide robust support for things like Fulbright programs that help with training and professionalization of journalism students from around the world. There's lots of other ways I think we can and should recognize that if the content that is being provided to the world is only that content coming from U.S. government sources, then we're mistaking our own core assumption, which is that an independent corps of journalists is the best way to get the truth out to the people of the world. Both Russia and China invest multiples of what we do in their state-funded and state-run content providers, whether it's RT or Sputnik or others. I think we should instead be providing funding that helps independent journalism around the world.
Thank you.
But let me also point out that when we did the CARES Act in response to the COVID pandemic, that there were provisions in there to help our small businesses, including small newspapers and media outlets that were really struggling. So we have already actually done some things to try and help ensure that those critical local outlets don't go out of business.
Connor O'Brien with Politico. Obviously, we're about 2 weeks past a midterm election where the control of the Senate stays the same, but the House is going to change. I'm just curious, did you field any questions, concerns from allies about what does divided government mean for various U.S. security commitments, and what did you tell them?
I haven't talked to anybody about the divided government question. It's been more around the continued bipartisan support for Ukraine, which we reassured them that that's the reason we're here. But perhaps Senator Risch or some of our House colleagues might have a different reaction.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most bipartisan issues that I've seen since I've been in Congress. Look, media's hit me up a number of times saying, well, your Republicans say, colleagues say, blah, blah, blah. Look, there's 535 members of Congress. America's a great country. People can think what they want, they can say what they want, they can do what they want. Even if you are in the vast, vast minority, there are only a handful of people that are balking at engaging in this struggle in Ukraine. They're getting a whole lot of ink from you guys, but there's out of the 535 that probably only make up a half a dozen or so. So focus on the majority. We are bound to do this in a bipartisan basis. We're arm in arm on this. You heard the Secretary of Defense this morning. He stated the policy of America, United States Congress, the policy of the United States of America is exactly what the Secretary described for you this morning.
Murray Brewster with CBC News here in Canada. Welcome, everyone, and welcome back for some. There's been an awful lot of hand-wringing in our country about the AUKUS deal and Canada not being at the table. I'm wondering if anyone on the panel here could answer whether or not there is room for Canada at that table and what the expectations might be.
Anybody want to? Well, I think the AUKUS deal is another opportunity for us to engage with our partners in the Indo-Pacific and to look at how we can continue to build on that. I think that's part of what the deal is, and they will continue to examine whether it should be expanded beyond the current participants.
Let me tell you, if you think the Canadians are unhappy, you ought to talk to the French. Look, that deal was put together by the administration, and I would criticize the administration on this. They didn't consult with us. I don't know, maybe they consulted on your side of the aisle. They didn't consult on our side of the aisle. That was ham-handed. It could have been done entirely differently. I'm hoping there'll be an opportunity to back up a little bit, take a breath, and expand that. What they did, the idea they had, was a really, really good idea. The execution was left a lot to be desired. I think you'll see. I think you'll see more go forward. As you point out, Canada is a natural participant for that. France is even a more natural participant for that. I'm hoping they'll get this right as we go forward. Thank you.
Sure.
As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, I've been having many conversations with our partners and allies around the world, including some of them who are in AUKUS, and all of them would like to have the same relationship with us as Canada does. So while you might not formally be in AUKUS, just rest assured that everyone knows that our partnership, what we work on together in terms of our shared defense industrial base, is well known among partners and allies and is recognized by us in the United States as well. Thank you.
Well said.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nahal Tusi with Politico. Some of you know me as Holly. It's really interesting to see you guys use the word bipartisan so much up here, this show of unity, this act of diplomacy, all of you being here. But I've talked to a lot of foreign diplomats lately and a lot of U.S. diplomats. And when they look at the U.S. Congress, including the Senate, they see a highly dysfunctional institution, one rife with extreme partisanship, one that has left dozens of ambassadorships empty, one that doesn't seem to value diplomacy. The U.S. international affairs budget has been, basically the same for about a decade, whereas the Pentagon's budget has risen by a lot more than that. They see one that can't even pass a State Department Authorization Act, except for once every 20 years, when it attaches it to the Defense Authorization Act. So when the rest of the world looks at you, why should they believe that you are capable of big and amazing things on these fronts when you can barely get along on most things?
Well, first of all, I would say because we have, and we continue to. And we are going to pass a defense authorization bill that is going to include a reauthorization of the State Department that has passed out of the committee, and I expect that to happen. I'm disappointed, as everyone else is, by the lack of action on ambassadorships, and I think there's a lot of blame to go around on that. But hopefully we're going to continue to make progress on that before the end of the year. And I would argue that what you're seeing here is a reaffirmation of the intent of those of us who care about our foreign policy and our national security to continue to work together in all of the ways that we can to ensure that that is robust and that we address the challenges going forward. Are we going to fall short? Absolutely. But those of us here are going to continue to try.
I want to answer the question.
Sure.
I just disagree entirely. The Senate has worked extremely well over the last 2 years. We passed some of the most landmark bipartisan pieces of legislation that we've been working on in some cases for a decade. Not only did we pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is going to result in massive job creation and investment across the country, we passed the CHIPS Act, which is essential for us to defeat Russia, to be able to block aggressions of China. And the fact that we as a country continually pass a bipartisan defense bill is allowing Ukraine to survive and continue to fight on every single day. If America hadn't done the investments we've strategically done for readiness for the past decade and a half that I've been in Congress, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be standing strong against Russia, and Ukraine won't be winning. All of that's bipartisan. And so the work that we do, the CHIPS Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the bipartisan gun bill, which put more money into mental health than our country's ever put into place, these are significant pieces of bipartisanship.
I just want to be clear. I asked about diplomacy, whose budget has
And
been
we're going to
the
let
same.
Senator Coons talk about the diplomatic budget. But we work on a bipartisan basis on national security all the time.
Your mood, Senator
My
Coons.
turn. My turn.
Go ahead. You go for it.
Don't believe everything you write.
Yeah, exactly. Go for it. Honey, bunny.
Look, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, forgive me for quoting you and smack me if I get this wrong, but Senator Risch earlier made a point of saying, in terms of the press coverage of sustained bipartisan support for Ukraine, there are a few members of Congress who've gotten a lot of ink in recent weeks by expressing some doubts or concerns. Out of 535, maybe a dozen. There is a small minority on the Foreign Relations Committee that holds or attacks or challenges particular ambassadorial confirmations from proceeding, and we've had challenges growing the diplomacy, the 150 accounts. I believe we should be investing in increases in diplomacy and development at the same pace with which we're investing in defense. But I vote for the defense authorization bill and for the defense appropriations every year. Our challenge is to maintain some of that balance. You are correct that both China and Russia have significantly increased their diplomatic footprint around the world in the last decade, and we haven't kept pace. China in particular has taken advantage of the opportunity to invest in the spaces in the UN that we, over the last few years, left vacant. I'm intent on growing our investment in these areas, and we've got bipartisan support to do that.
Senator Risch, next time, give me the interview.
Sure, yes, please.
Yeah, I am also one that would like to see enhanced investments in diplomacy. I think we could invest more there because I think we actually have a unique window of opportunity to engage more robustly. Because what's happening, what I see, and I've taken a lot of international trips as a member of the Armed Services and the Intel Committee, people want our leadership. They prefer our partnership, right? China, I'm just going to be blunt here. They are bullies. They are coercive. They engage in predatory economics, and the world sees that. I was talking to an African ambassador at the Aspen Security Conference this past summer, and he told me, we need you to re-engage and to re-engage in a more robust way because we don't want the alternative. The people of my country don't want the alternative, but you need to step up. So I agree with the assumption that there is an opportunity, and it would be best for our country and best for the world.
One thought. Yeah, thanks.
You touched a nerve.
Well, yeah, you did, but it's
Everybody wants to talk about this one.
but it's a healthy discussion to have because sometimes I think folks on the outside looking in look at us and say, well, you're arguing about things. It's the way the founding fathers wanted it. They wanted a debate to go on. They didn't want us to be jamming things quickly. They wanted the House to show the emotional side and what was of a topic of current interest. They're really good at it. The Senate was designed to slow things down and to say, if we're talking about national or international activity, and we're really good at that. We're really good at that. But you know, it's like yesterday. I was on the floor of the Senate yesterday, and by unanimous consent, we passed legislation, and we did it on a bipartisan basis with Senator Hirono. Each of us had a piece of legislation that we wanted to pass. We'd been working on it for almost 2 years, each of us. And in one morning, we were able to ask by unanimous consent that both of our pieces of legislation be passed. Both of them were passed after literally months of roadblock. It takes time, it takes patience. The founding fathers wanted the Senate to be deliberative. And so, yeah, do all of us have lots of patience? No, we don't. But there are some things that if you look year in and year out, we take our time to work on the National Defense Authorization Act. It has passed 61 years in a row. We do find bipartisan support. It just takes us time to do it. And right now, sometimes we spend our time, and this is kind of, this is perhaps being a little bit negative about us. We spend a lot of time on what I call elective items, whereas we have required parts of our courses that we sometimes leave until the very end, such as appropriations and so forth. We're working at trying to get better. And if you talk to the individual members of the Senate, none of us want to do continuing resolutions. We'd rather do the appropriations on time, but that requires consent of the vast majority, along with leadership supporting it as well, and it takes time to get done.
Okay, we beat that horse now.
Yeah.
This will be the last question.
Thank you. Anton LaGuardia of The Economist. You've expressed your desire to see Ukraine win. You've just expressed your desire to prevent a future war in Europe. What does that actually mean to you? Does it mean helping Ukraine retake all its territory all the way to Crimea? Does it mean admitting Ukraine to NATO in future?
That's actually a good question.
It is. Do you want to start?
Yeah, let me take a run at that. Look, this war is between Russia and Ukraine. Russia started it unprovoked. They've executed it viciously. The Ukrainian people have fought back bravely. They inspire us. But when it comes to how this is going to be resolved, it's going to be between the Russians and the Ukrainians. We are not going to superimpose our will on how this gets resolved. The Ukrainians have got to live with this. They have got to design a peace that is, as Irmak said, enduring, and as Zelensky said, is enduring. So we stand behind them in that regard, but with an eye on the fact that the United Nations was put together to ensure that the boundaries of countries had integrity. And Russia is doing everything it can to pull that down. This is a part of international law, and a settlement should be in compliance with international law.
Next question.
Thank you. That concludes the press conference.
NATO, I'm sure.
Thank you all very much.
Are we done?
Yeah.
Time.
No, that's it.